The Ayyubids had built up an impressive army of Turkish mercenaries, Mamluks, literally meaning owned, recruited from the Central Asian steppes and the Caucasus. They retained an unquestioned loyalty to their ruler. However, in 1249, when the last Ayyubid ruler, Salih Ayyub, died fighting King Louis IX of France in the Seventh Crusade in the Egyptian Delta, a succession crisis arose. Al-Salih's death was kept a secret until his son Turanshah could arrive from distant Diyarbakir. When he arrived, though, Turanshah brought with him his own Mamluks, and soon became apparent that he intended to eliminate those of his father. But the latter struck first, eliminating Turanshah and his Mamluks and putting Al-Salih's wife Shajarat al-Dur on the throne, until she was soon forced to take one of them as husband and sultan. And this became the Mamluk dynasty in Egypt. The Mamluks preserved many of its administrative features of their predecessors, but maintained their ethnic separateness by importing young Turkish slaves. These would be freed and brought up as Muslims, and having severed all family ties, would be, at least in theory, fiercely loyal to their masters. On the death of a Mamluk Sultan, a nominal successor would be appointed, while the main officers of the state, the emirs, jokeyed behind the scenes or clashed on the streets of Cairo to see who could gather the most support. This frequently resulted in a fast turnover of sultans, but the efficacy of the system is demonstrated by Mamluk's lengthy tenure of over 250 years, during which time they were the principal power of the Middle East. The pre-modern part of Cairo is today still filled with more monuments from the Mamluk period than any other. Sultans and emirs vied with one another in erecting complexes containing mausoleums, together with some combination of mosques, madrasas, and khanakas, residences for Sufis. Crucial toward understanding this are the complex relationships that existed between the Sultan and his emirs, the religious leaders, the ulama, and the practice of waqf, religious endowment. Although the building of mausoleums was tolerated by the majority of ulama, there was persistent minority that did not condone the practice, holding that it led to unseemly pilgrimages and inappropriate intercessionary prayers. One way to absolve oneself from criticism of this kind would be to incorporate a mausoleum within a religious complex. Islam, of course, encourages almsgiving, and the founders of these institutions were undoubtedly motivated by the pious intentions of bringing charitable benefits to others. But another motive was also important. For an emir or sultan, life was often precarious. A collision of unfavorable emirs could lead to falling out of favor and banishment, or even execution and confiscation of one's worldly goods. However, if one's property was given as waqf to a religious institution, it was, at least in theory, donated in perpetuity and free from the threat of confiscation. Under the family waqf system that operated in most of the central Islamic lands, it was possible to appoint family members as administrators to the waqf. The revenue from the trust would be needed to maintain the buildings and pay for the salaries of the employees, but any excess could be spent at the discretion of the administrators. Some recent quantitative studies of operating expenses for the waqfs of the last important Mamluks, Sultan al-Ghauri, have estimated that as much as 90% of the revenue of his endowments was surplus to the needs of the religious institutions. In particular, in Mamluk architecture, there was the Mosque Madrasa of Sultan Hassan, and it became the principal it belongs to the Mamluk dynasty, which ruled from 1250 to 1517 and became the principal power of the Middle East. Built in Cairo, it must be understood within a city that is still filled with more monuments from the Mamluk period than any other, reflecting an intense culture of architectural patronage by sultans and emirs. This monument represents a complex architectural type combining mosque, madrasa, and mausoleum, often organized around a monumental courtyard with imams. Such complexes were characteristic of Mamluk architecture, where multiple institutional functions were integrated into a single building. The inclusion of a mausoleum within a religious complex reflects a strategic architecture decision. It allowed patrons to reconcile funerary practices with religious expectations. The scale of and monumentality of these complexes demonstrate both technical sophistication and desire for lasting visibility. Although the text focuses more on institutional function than specific ornament, it emphasizes the broader Mamluk tendency toward richly endowed buildings founded through a waqf religious endowment. These endowments supported construction, maintenance, salaries, and decoration. Decoration is such in such complexes typically included carved stone inscriptions and geometric and vegetal motifs, serving both aesthetic and ideological purposes. Importantly, the financial structure of Waqf allowed surplus revenue, sometimes up to 90%, to be controlled by administrators linking decoration and architecture directly to economic strategies. This mosque must be understood within a unique, also political system of the Mamluks, where it was unstable and frequently contested among emirs. Sultans and elites competed in building monumental complexes containing mosques, madrasas, khanakas, and mausoleums.